So welcome back, class. Week three. Um, I think somehow the cyber witches have been haunting our crusade, our fight against ignorance. I think there are some witches online trying to prevent us from this fight against ignorance that we're trying to do. So, but somehow we'll overcome. No, it's just a joke. Yeah. So week three, African philosophy in search of ontology. I've been very excited about this class today, and I could have recorded it and then posted it, but it was something so personal to me that I thought that having a live class would have been much better, and that's why I decided to uh, do it that way. But it's okay. I'm sure we'll figure out a way proceeding. And again, it was a mess this morning, but I'm sure we'll overcome. So think about this. Think about environment. Think about the context where you are, wherever you come from. Do you think that environment, culture, history shape your philosophical thinking? Think about this. Suppose you live in a mountainous region. Maybe you live, let's assume you live somewhere in the rainforest where I come from. Uh, I have all these big rainforest trees, sometimes, lions. And if you go to deeper forests, like if you go to South Africa or Kenya, that this kind of environment would shape your thinking about philosophy. Or if you live in the plain lands of uh, somewhere else in part of Africa, or if you live in the US or Europe, have you thought about how this can shape people's philosophical thinking? Obviously, our environment shapes our religious thinking. No, how we our relationship to the environment is shaped by the environment. But what about philosophy? Have you ever thought about that? And so normally, when I give this class, I try to give people a kind of a teaser. So here we're going to talk about if you see this now, what comes to your mind? What is this? Sometimes some people get it right, sometimes some don't. So what is this? What does it mean for you? What is this? Can you imagine where this place is? You know, I wish there is the class is live because this would have been something to be think about. Think about this. Okay, maybe makes sense now. Oh, is that the falls in Canada, in the US, or where is it? Well, of course, obviously, I don't know. It's called Musi Otunya. So Musi Otunya in a Zambian language means smoke that thunders. Smoke that thunders. In Zimbabwe side, they call it Victoria Falls. Uh, in Zambia, they call it Musi Otunya, because they say, well, Victoria Falls, well, if Zimbabweans can keep their Victoria Falls, in the side of Zambia, I think Musi Otunya is what our fathers called it. So we cannot just call it Livingstone or Livingstone Falls or Victoria Falls because our ancestors lived in this part of the world before the coming of the white people. So, and actually, for the people thinking about it, because if you've been to Victoria Falls, I've been there, or Musi Otunya, I've been there. You'll be seeing gudu smoke. But you'll be seeing smoke, but it's thundering. But that's the water falling in, and you'll be seeing the smoke going up all over the place. It makes sense to them. They relate to it in that way. And so today, segment of the problem, we're going to talk about ethnophilosophy. Okay? We'll talk about ethnophilosophy. You know, because to do African philosophy, we might have to ask again, what makes it African? Okay? What is African philosophy? Is there an African political philosophy, for example? If so, what is it constitutive of? No? Who can philosophize about Africa? What makes it African? And what is wrong with this question? So in this class, we're going to think, philosophize, and think again, and maybe make meaningful statements, and so on and so forth. So we're going to discuss what they've been called four trends in African philosophy. You know, trends is how do you make meaning of African philosophy? And I want to start with the disclaimer. This is only for the English speaking Africa, okay? So this does not cover the Portuguese aspect of it, nor the French-speaking Africa, nor even North Africa. So this is mainly the conversations that dominate the the English-speaking part of African philosophy. And then, so in this class, we're going to discuss this today. So I will not go first of all today. We're going to talk about these four trends. What are they made of? How is it possible that we can speak in these terms? Um, is it really justifiable to speak of philosophy in these kind of trends? What are the limitations? And then after that, I'll give examples of each trend, and I'll make a criticism of each trend. So by the end of the day, then we'll have a series of questions that I will leave you to go home when you watch this video. You can think about. You can discuss with your friends. You can discuss in your WhatsApp chat group. What do you think of this and stuff like that? And so we're gonna make it in that way. So we're gonna talk about these trends. I'm gonna explain each of these trends and how they apply to African philosophy. I will give examples, and then I will see how they relate. Do they overlap, or can they go individually? These trends represent simply different approaches or classifications of African philosophy. The first thing to note about these trends is, first of all, that on base of language. So you say that we have Lusophone philosophy, we have a Francophone philosophy, we have this then Anglophone philosophy, and I have the Arabic philosophy, of course. Sometimes they overlap, but that's one way of doing that. But for purpose of this class, I am going to be using the classification that has been developed by Henry Odoro Oruka, the Kenyan African philosopher, and a way of making sense of how philosophy has evolved over time and what are the issues. Because the purpose of this trend or approaches or classifications is actually to help us wrap our mind around this kind of thinking. So, okay, so it goes, okay, if we hear something, if you read a text, we say, okay, this is actually the debate in this kind of philosophy or this kind of tradition or whatever the case may be, or this kind of argument fits into these places. And so this is why we make these trends. And so the first trend, the first one talk about the ethnophilosophy, which is kind of ideas. So talk about philosophy ideas, about philosophers who try to reconcile a traditional Bantu way of doing things. What are those indigenous way, cultures, and so on and so forth. Well, I'm going to go into detail about this later on in a few minutes now. And then we have sage philosophy. As the name suggests, the sages. So I'm sure some of you will eventually end up being sages, like sage, like Socrates, and so on and so forth. So you see them in the villages. We'll talk about Gotomele of Dogon, for example. We'll talk about Oromilan. We'll talk about all those indigenous sages in different societies that have powerful way of understanding the world that can actually shape our meaning and the reading of philosophy. And then we have the nationalistic ideological philosophy. This one is pretty simple. The one that has been used after post-colonialism to talk about making the state, talk about things like conscientism, Ujamaa, Zambian humanism. This would fall into the nationalistic ideological philosophy. Then we have professional philosophy. According to Odero Roka, yours truly will be part of them. I will be part of the so-called professional philosophy. Although I tell myself, no, but thanks, I don't want to be part of that because it assumes certain form of elitist mobility to think that, well, we are the ones who went to university, have PhDs in philosophy, therefore we are the philosophers. So let's go into the details of all these trends and see how they mirror each other and see what are the characteristics, what are the main characteristics, and what can we learn from them, most importantly. These trends then will help us make sense of all this. So we'll start with number one, ethno-philosophy. You know, first of all, the argument here is that African philosophy as a reaction to the debased view of the African and his or her philosophy. Okay, this is a part of the basis. Okay, the challenge is that Africans have been said, as we read in the last two classes, Kant, Hume, Hegel, all those people say, well, we have no historical memory. So ethnophilosophy then is an attempt to create, to show, hey, you say we have no philosophy. Oh, check. You can see, check. Oh, okay, actually it fits. They have their own philosophy. So this is one of the things people think of ethnophilosophy, but we'll see actually if this is the case. Um, so, ethnophilosophy examines specific worldviews of African communities, which are then given the status of philosophical. You know, how do certain people, environment, culture, religion, how does all this shape their philosophical thinking? Yeah, so here the emphasis on the communal aspect of the philosophizing. So, for example, if in Western philosophy we talk about individualism and logic, here we'll talk about, well, community. So, communities, for example, giving priority to the individual. Notice now, community is not just community of human beings. As you will see eventually when I talk about ethno philosophy, you will see, you begin to appreciate. That's why actually environmental ethics and environmental philosophers, they'll be looking towards African philosophy to offer us a new way of thinking about the environment. You will see that in African philosophy, when we talk about community, we talk about human beings, yes, the living, yes, the living dead, I will explain that more, the environment, the animals, the plants, the ants, the inanimate objects. All of these, they make sense of the community. Even if in the hierarchy of beings, a human being eventually becomes in the pyramid, God, human beings, and other things, still they are recognized as part of our human community, and we have to pay respect to them. You would appreciate that. And so here, community is generally giving priority to individual rights. But that is now comes to the debate on community and individual rights. One of the people who are famous scholars in this will be Leopold Senghor. We'll talk more about him when we go to negritude, and then John Mbiti and Alexis Kagame. For this class, I'm going to focus only on Temples and Kagame, and another German philosopher, Jan Jansen, who was also part of the leading thinkers in ethnophilosophy. All right. So you see here now that African philosophy becomes fundamental assumptions. You say that African philosophy from about the reality reflected in the language of African people. So environment, but also the languages. They say, well, one can have access to philosophical thinking through languages. And so ethnophilosophy works on that assumption. It rejects Eurocentric way of philosophizing of in place of an African experience. Well, philosophy in Europe is wonderful, but perhaps the context of history and experience and environment is not just context of history, it's not just context of environment, but also everything else put together in the kind of that kind of in the kind of dialogue with each other. Let's philosophize on basis of all those experience of history, of environment today, of our thinking about time, about thinking about reality. What does it mean for us? So this is the priority for ethno-philosophers. Individualism is displaced with community, as I mentioned earlier. So community of beings, not just human community, but instead of just saying man is a measure of all things, that a man is a, like, remember those of you who are, okay, of course, you're going to do Kantian philosophy. If you remember at the early time of modernity, Robinson Crusoe, John Defoe's Robinson Crusoe, about Man Friday, and then he's like the man and the encounter with the Man Friday, and then to make sense that individualism of all men, and Kant then ended up saying that even if you are in an island, you have a moral duty to yourself. In a kind of kingdom of end, we are embodiments of morality. We decide what is moral. Well, ethno philosophy say, oh, hold on, time out, time out. You, no. You might be part of the conversation, but you don't decide what is moral. Morality is through dialogue with other beings. So this is really very exciting. I'm just so sorry we couldn't do this live, because it would be much, much better, more powerful. Yeah, it's the beauty of it all. It's not just that, it's all of us together. Animals, beings, plants, whatever. If you want to go and hunt, okay, go ahead and get food, but remember that you just get enough. It's not for cumulative or accumulation, but enough. Remembering that the animals have ghosts and the power and stuff like that. And also, rationality, logic is displaced with emotion and intuition. It's not just logic, because the argument that, well, reason is provincial. And this is true. Rationality, reason is provincial, is shaped by culture, religion, and history. So, every aspect, you see people do something, so this is irrational. But if you examine the internal rationality of these experiences, you would recognize that actually there is internal logic to what they did. So it might be logical for you in Netherlands, but maybe if you go to America today, say, well, what are you doing? This is strange, you know. So reason is shared. So they say, well, so rationality is not sufficient. No, rationality is not sufficient. Well, intuition and emotion should also be considered. So poetic is also poetic as opposed to logic, you know. So instead of saying I think therefore I am, one can say I dance, therefore I am. That's why every time before the class we'll start with music. I want to open your mind because yes, I dance, therefore I am human being. You know, it's not just thinking, it's also dancing. You know, opens up or intuition, emotion. It opens up the heart. What Italians call aggiornamento, aggiornamento. Open the windows for fresh air. You know, open the windows for fresh air. You know, dance, dance, dance as you philosophize. So, and of course, history, as I mentioned, identity, environment, and culture is then what distinguishes African philosophy from ethno philosophy now, from Western philosophy. Now, compare with the Milesians, you know, Anaximander, Thales, and Anaximenes. You know, this is a Western philosophy, go Google them and you find out that what shaped them. Oh, fire, oh, water, oh, whatever. So you see, their own environment also shaped their own thinking. These were the pre-Socratics, you know. So very fascinating. You see, oh, maybe, oh, this is actually the case. So this is actually the case. So ethnic philosophy works on that assumption of environment and identity and history and everything else, shaping your own philosophical assumption. It's not just that you sit down, armchair, theorize. How many angels are dancing on the tip of a pen? This is my pen. How many angels? Begin to the logic of metaphysics. Or what? No, they say, well, that is good, but it's not good enough. But mostly we find this, of course, what been classified anthropologists, theologians. This has been what been categorized as people who participate in ethno-philosophy. All right. So let's move on to the people who really become the champion or the lead scholars of ethno-philosophy. Number one is Leopold Sedar Senghor. We'll get back. You will hear a lot about him because we're going to talk about negritude, and because you see also part of the criticism of those who criticize ethno-philosophy is that African critical studies today emerged because of ethno-philosophy. As a matter of fact, the idea of blackness, the idea that blackness is not real, is not just a residual subjectivity, can be recovered and recuperated. The idea of Pan-Africanism to rethink the question of race. Post-colonialism, you see the relationship between decolonization and actually ethno-philosophy. And you're going to appreciate that. This is why this kind of class actually, I do it in such a way that it's African, but there's a lot we can learn and we don't have a lot of time. You know, I wish really that there's so much time on what we can do. Yeah. And then Senghor, former president of Kenya, of Senegal, sorry. He was a former president and he was also a philosopher and a poet. So for him, talking about ethno-philosophy, this is how he described it. He said the black person is feeling an intuitive being and not rationalistic. Well, that's problematic actually. I have a problem with that eventually. I said, well, actually, no, we are rationalistic. Oh, come on. But maybe you could say they're not just rationalistic, but also intuitive. Maybe also there are other people in other parts of the world that are also intuitive. So that's a little bit too. I think that was a little bit of chat. But also, the black person is also spontaneous being that experiences the world primarily through the senses and not just intellect. So yes, now he makes a very good point. The senses, you feel, you think. So for him, this is now right. He said classical European reason is an analytical and makes use of the object. African reason is intuitive and participates in the object. You know, participation is not just think, but you participate. So to rationalize, to philosophize, to participate in philosophy. So you don't philosophize, you participate in philosophy. So you can say you feel it, you think it, you live it. So think it is not enough to think it. So it's also practical philosophy. You feel it. You feel it from my heart. So when I speak to you, I'm sure you could see the excitement jumping from my heart. You could see the passion. It's just my way of doing philosophy in Africa that philosophy must be done with passion. Otherwise, it's useless. So you feel it, you think it, you feel it, you participate in it. So you mean what you say what you mean. So The African mode of experience is the law of participation, which is actually emotive. And that is powerful. That's a very, very powerful way of putting it. I loved it. I like it so much. I like it. Philosophy, who said philosophy should be boring? You know, when I was undergraduate, sometimes you, okay, okay, I hated it, I hated it. Philosophy can also be motive and passion because it's not just about thinking, but also you can, wow, so this is great, oh, this is wonderful, let's go have coffee, let's go and philosophize. It becomes meaningful. And so for now, this is they say the Cartesian cogito, I think, therefore I am. Senghor substitutes I feel, therefore I am. And to the discursive reason, Senghor opposes with intuitive reason. I mentioned it. So for him, the Negro African sympathizes, abandons his personality to become identified with the other. He does not assimilate, he is assimilated. He lives a common life with the other. He lives in a symbiosis. No, I want you to feel me, says the voter who wants you to know him well. No, he was the president of Senegal for many years. Okay, I think therefore I am the cat, right? The Negro African could say, I feel, I dance, therefore I am. So when we come to class every day and I put that music every class, get up where you are, dance. I wish the video, the Katura was working, because normally I like to dance. I dance. You see me dance in my own privacy, and then you can join. You know, dance, dance. It is not the reason eye of Europe. It is the reason of touch. Better still, the reasoning embrace, the sympathetic reason, more closely related to the Greek logos than the Latin ratio. For logos, before Aristotle meant both reason and the word. At any rate, Negro African speech does not mold the object into rigid categories and concepts without touching it. It polishes things and restores the original color with their texture. You see, it touches it. You cannot pass through being the same thing. More like Heraclitus in a little way, you can't step into the same river twice, but this time around, you can't go through African philosophy without being touched by it. Like sound and perfume. It's innate humility. It would be more accurate to speak of sub-reality, you know. So European reasoning is analytical, discussive by utility, utilization. The Negro African reasoning is intuitive by participation. So you just reason. Reason is abstract. So think about it. You reason, okay, so what? But you participate. So you can't pass through African philosophy without getting touched by it. Because you are part of it. You are what you philosophize. You philosophize, you demonstrate, you participate, you think, and so on and so forth. And so this is Senghor. And then let's move to the most important person who actually, this is Placidus Campos from Belgium. He's a Franciscan priest. A Franciscan priest who came to Africa. So we talk about Placidus Campos. So Placidus Campos will be the next slides we're going to talk about here now. So we've already mentioned the other